right, good afternoon. My name is Dr. Kimberly Quinn, hosting our new podcast series, Man to Man. I've got with me up on the screen Dr. Jim Howland. To my left is Dr. Dave Landers, and to his left is Dr. Tom Myers. Welcome, everyone. So this podcast is really came about with some conversation about how much there is to talk about, according to these gentlemen here. Mm-hmm. A lot of this has not been talked about. And so the idea with this podcast is to talk about young men in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and on up, not all today, but with all different themes and topics throughout the whole series. So today, really what we kind of want to talk about is lessons learned by boys early on that then kind of follow them into adulthood, right? And so this conversation has also happened previously with these three gentlemen, so they kind of know what they're getting into. Okay, so the first thing, gentlemen, I'd like to ask you is, no matter our age, men may still remember themselves as boys. Why is that?
I used to ask my students in my Men of Masculinities class if their parents could still push their buttons. And every student raised their hand. And I said, you're young adults, why can they still push your buttons? And they were like, I don't know. I said, because they put them in. And the students were like, whoa, my father died 64 years ago. So I haven't had a father in 64 years. I still remember things that he said to me, things that he said about me, and watching his interaction with the rest of us in the family. Now at almost 79 years old. And it still impacts me. You know, I've worked through it.
But it's there.
But it's there. It's there, you know.
Yeah, it is funny how we hold on to these memories, the formative times of our life, and very impactful, maybe transitional times of our life, but those are those solidified memories that are really ingrained. And you know, and it's so funny because even today, I go home or I see my family, it reverts right back to childhood. Yeah. And I'm not Tom or Thomas, I'm Tommy. Back to Tommy. And back to the memories of remember we did this and that. So it's almost, and it's sometimes plays into the roles we played. You know, I'm the oldest of three boys, you know, and I'm the older brother, and we're the middle and the youngest. And so it is funny as grown men that we still can snap right back to our childhood and those roles that we played, even with the same name.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so you're the oldest of three boys, and I'm the youngest of three boys.
Okay, yeah. So it'd be good to talk about.
You know, which again is fascinating, but for me, I had a fight with my father the day before he died, and I vowed I would not speak to him again until he apologized to me, and he died the next day. Wow. I don't fight with people. I don't do that. And literally, I mean, this is 64 years later. I usually don't fight with people.
Good.
Professor.
Sure. I mean, when we think about role models and we think about what we do and think about play, all children play, and they're either, you know, trying to resemble or mimic their mom or their dad or whoever their parental figure is. And, you know, I think no matter what age you are, you go back to those memories and you go back to, you know, how did I model myself, either like or unlike? You know, some of that intention, some of that unconscious about trying to be a certain person.
Absolutely. So right now we have an oldest of three boys, a youngest of three boys, and Jim's twin's a boy. Now, man, but you know what I'm saying? There's a lot of testosterone in the air. That's what I'm saying. So I'm thinking, gentlemen, so you're talking about how, you know, you automatically kind of revert back, you know, to being in that younger mindset and expectations and everything, and kind of right back to being a little boy, right? And I'm wondering, with that said, if you can maybe talk about what lessons you might have learned as little boys that you're still there, maybe. Professor, you want to start us off?
Sure. This is one of the things that I'm always curious about, and in a course I teach called Applied Adolescent Development, I often ask them to write a letter to their adolescent self. And a lot of that actually comes into a bit of them understanding how they, as young adults, operate the same or differently than when they were in middle school or in high school. But we often talk about the difference between who was our family, the people we lived with, our role models. Did we model ourselves after them? And then when did it shift? When do we look to the peer group? When do we look to the friends? When do we look for, I want to be like so-and-so, my classmate, and starting to model themselves or mimic themselves or compare themselves. It starts quite young. The messaging that happens when they're quite young is often brought to us by whoever our parental figures are.
Right.
So the toys we play, the clothes we wear, all of those things are given to us. So they shape us. And then we either continue along or we get additional information that tells us otherwise.
Dave's gonna totally follow me with this one. Probably you too, Todd. Did you ever see Jackson Katz when he came here? He was here. This is reminding me, Jim, of the gazillion talks that Dave and I have had too on the performance of masculinity.
Yeah.
And so this is like little baby boy preschool for it. So maybe just jump in with.
And part of the message, and this is one of the problems I think, is that as little kids, our parents are right. And if something happens, it's because we've done something wrong.
Yes.
And it's in my book, but my 10-year-old nephew said to me one day, Uncle Dave, why doesn't Dad play ball with me in the backyard like my friends' fathers do? And I had to explain to him that our father never did that with us, and probably his grandfather didn't do that with him. But the question he was asking was, what's wrong with me that Dad doesn't do this? And that message is just so powerful, unless there's someone to say it wasn't you. And fortunately, Brian asked me that question, and I was able to explain, your dad loves you, but he wasn't raised to do that, and so it isn't you. But the underlying question was, which kids carry forever, is I must have done something wrong. So if there's a divorce in the family, the kids say, if I'd kept my room cleaner, if I'd done better in school, if I'd done better in sports, then this wouldn't be happening. It has nothing to do with them, but no one explains that to them.
Yeah, I think that Jimmy mentioned about roles, and I was just thinking as you said that, because I'm the oldest of three. Early on, my parents had a kind of tumultuous relationship. There was alcoholism, and there's a lot of interesting things. It wasn't a very comfortable nor an expected life of I would say there's just a lot of upheaval. So early on, I was always told, you're gonna love this, you're the man of the house. At a young guy.
And how old were you?
Oh gosh, I was maybe 7, 8, 9 years old.
You're the man of the house, and you're in
Dad's
second
not
grade.
around, so you're gonna be the man of the house. And I said to myself, dude, I'm not.
Right.
I'm a kid. What am I going to do? I don't know.
Right.
Even on mobile lawn, I did all the chores still at that early age. So that followed me throughout life.
Because the oldest
I
and the boy.
am the man of the house. You have got to take responsibility. No one else is around.
And you did.
And I did.
I bet you did.
And I did. And
Yes,
it ultimately
exactly.
came to a point. There was later on, I'm going to do it later, but a role reversal of me taking care of my
I was
father.
just thinking that.
Yeah.
Because the ACOA thing, Tom.
That's what I'm
even
thinking.
there's overlap. Go ahead.
The ACOA?
Yeah.
The acronym is for?
Adult Children of Alcoholics, and so as you know,
Same here.
I think it's all four of us, right? So, and I'm the oldest of no boys, but just to chime in with that, because you're blending the two things, which makes it even more powerful, right? Because as the oldest, regardless of boy or girl, you're just like, oh my God, I gotta do this. Then you bring in the society's expectations of men, even though you're a little itty bitty
You're
man.
the protector, you're the man of the house.
At 7.
Yeah.
And you're also, it's also your responsibility to make excuses for him or her.
Yeah.
Oh, totally.
You have to say to school, well, Dad's really busy.
not
That's why he
around,
can't
right.
be here right now. Mom's
Exactly.
really busy because she's doing this and this and this. Because that's what we do. We make excuses for them because they've got to be right because that's the way we're raised. But then you become the man.
Yeah.
Well, there's also the survival thing,
Oh,
right? Because a child inherently, I see Jim nodding, the child inherently knows that our very survival is dependent on this, sick person.
Yeah.
And so that we can't survive if they're not right.
Ironically, till today, my dad is 92 years old, and we're very close. We remain close. Again, sometimes there's a bit of a role reversal, but still to this day, we'll talk more about him later on. But it's interesting how that follows through life.
Let's hear from the professor.
Well, I agree with what you're all saying. When you get put in that role, and again, thinking of something you said, Dave, and you as well, Thomas, is that we're obedient.
Yes.
So you get put in that role, so you do that role, right? And that actually, in so many ways, brings in this whole piece of what role is. We start to think about, like, what's the role of the man, if you will? And if we take that traditional role, is that the way that it goes through the rest of the life? And if it means that you're doing all these responsibilities, you have to take charge. How does that actually shape when you have, you're stepped out of that role, you stepped out of the house, if you will, and then you're in a place where you've got a partner and you've got somebody that, wants to have an equal relationship with you, but that isn't what you know.
Right.
And that's the part where
Good
it
point.
gets so complicated. And, I've been, racking my brain and thinking about, is the cycle changing? Are we actually opening up roles for both, for men and women, if you will, to be aware of, it doesn't have to be these quote unquote traditional roles. That, the male is the breadwinner, the woman takes care of the kids and delivers the children, and, the song, the what's strong, what does that mean? What's a sense of strength? I'd like to ask anybody who, any man who hasn't given birth, that's certainly a sign of strength. But let's, where do we take that value?
And we can talk more about this later, but the other thing that happened is when almost 3 years ago the pandemic hits, and all of a sudden fathers are home with their kids,
Right.
and fathers are starting to understand what their wives have been doing at home, and they're starting to say, wait a minute, I've missed this time with my son or my daughter. And so I think one of the only good things about the pandemic was it really forced men and women to look at their roles within a house, because they've got these children they're responsible for, and the pandemic all of a sudden shut everything down.
Right.
So they had to deal with things differently.
Right.
And I think that's a really interesting point, especially, and we'll talk more about that, but when we think about young men, especially college-age men, they went back into their bunkers. They went into isolation.
Absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And to hear, like, well, I don't know how to talk to my roommate. I'm like, well, texting is great, but and this is where Zoom actually did some beautiful things, where it did allow it. But this is where women are light years ahead of men when it comes to how we connect and how we find this way where guys needed to get a little bit more with the program when it came to that. And
I have a question, gentlemen. This is all feeding right into it because I wasn't at this question before you and Dave just had that little banter back and forth. So when we were on the emotional thing and we kind of jump, but it feeds in, stay with me. When you were little boys and then we leapfrog into big boys and not men, there seemed like, at least for me listening in as the fly on the wall, I missed something there with, I heard the word emotion lots and lots and lots, right? But I didn't hear anything about how you learned to label anything. So you're walking around feeling, but I didn't hear anything about really labels and how did you know what you were feeling?
I still don't know.
No.
I think that's a part of the men's thing, and I know for me, I hardened inside. And again, because of external, I wouldn't say trauma per se, but probably traumas over time, that you begin to harden and expectations, you get so excited about something and it doesn't come to fruition over and over again.
Right.
So I began to kind of, not expect that much, but then to harden my emotions. And even so, today my wife will say, how are you feeling about this? And it really is, I think it's sometimes difficult for me to kind of pinpoint exactly how do you put words
Right.
to this emotion, and I can just feel it. I feel anxious, or I feel angry, or I feel tense inside. But what is the emotion that is that label? So
And
I
if we
still take a hard time with
never
that.
saw that in people who are supposed to be our role models, fathers, for example, you think about crying. I never saw my father cry, ever. And in my chapter in the book about crying, there's so many students that I never saw my father cry. And so young women would say, if I have a boyfriend and he cries, it's like there's something wrong with him, because I never saw that. And because we didn't see those things, we didn't expect them. But the key, I think one of the things you talked about is to survive, we compartmentalize and we shut down, because emotions were being seen as being weak.
Yes. Yeah.
Which
and
is
I-
different from women.
And specifically where I grew up was in very remote, rural area of Maine, where it was very blue collar focused, hard work.
Yep.
You work hard, put your head down, do that work, and you don't explain or don't talk about your feelings, because that is weak.
You don't do that.
And doesn't that come down to vulnerability?
Oh yeah, sure.
Right, and if we think about the definition of vulnerability, Kim, this is a great point. Vulnerability means that there is a threat to us that may result in us in that fight, flight, freeze response, right? So it's looked at as being there is an intended or an assumed or a possible threat. Not saying it's being open, right? Open and aware and, willing. We want to think of vulnerability as being like a sharing, but in the definition, the true definition of it, as I've looked up, it's really about an attack. They use words like attack, use words like we may be harmed physically or emotionally. And again, as far as I can tell from social media and from movies and such, showing a man crying isn't necessarily looked at as celebrated. It's looked at as being a sign of weakness, right?
But they didn't know where to go.
And showing vulnerability in a relationship, showing vulnerability in a relationship means taking a risk.
Yes.
It's like sitting on a tree branch naked, way out there. I want to jump in right there. Speaking of naked on a tree branch, because I was saying this to Dave, I think also Tom a couple weeks ago. It's interesting because do you think, I'll put in a question for him, do you think maybe that men can also be, and women in a different way, but that's another podcast, be their own worst enemies? Because when men talk about crying, and I've shared with my husband, who to me is just like the poster for healthy masculinity, strong and just taking care of the family, and he also can sob like under the Tuscan sun, you know what I mean, or whatever. But women, I can't speak for all women. I know I can't think of one who doesn't. Out of all the women I know, we think that's so hot, that's so attractive.
Yeah.
Like we think that's strong. So it's interesting that you think it's weak. We're not saying that.
But the message we get is that toxic masculinity is what men are like.
But who's giving the message, David? It's not the women.
Everybody. The media's giving it, the television, politicians, religious people, they're all giving toxic masculinity is what's out there. And when you find someone who can break through that and go, like the group that, the work that you and Nick do, with men's discussion, the work that you do, the work that Chris does, the work that we all do, we're breaking a message that toxic masculinity is okay. No, it's not.
Of course it's not.
It's not.
And it makes more.
And exactly.
I don't think it's too late for us old people, but I do think it's.
That's what middle life's for. I was just thinking just now. At least for women, we're ironing all that stuff out. We feel like that we have the world by the ass in our 50s. But so this is a good. Actually, that's a good segue, Jim, to the next sort of idea I had in my head, because obviously, regardless of gender or anything, we're all. It's just a brain thing where we run feedback. We have dialogue going on constantly, right? Shaped by a million different things. But specifically in our conversation with men, I'm wondering what are sort of like for our listeners, what are sort of some of the common themes of I think, as you put it earlier, shortcomings in our earlier conversation that men run, and they also what are the main themes of shortcomings that you're cycling through your heads, and why do you feel the need to repeat them? Twofold question.
I think the dialogue that I have, or monologue in my brain, is one that is not always positive, and that was again originated as a young child, but again having a level of confidence that was growing, and then against society and other things that start to kind of beat that down a little bit. And for me, it's sometimes a motivation, like, okay, toughen up. Let's get going. Let's, don't be a wimp. And these are dialogues that I have in my head, and that you beat yourself up in a way that's sometimes motivating, but it's also those pressures, those things that you have from externally. And I did an incredible workshop last year called Positive Intelligence with Sherzad Shamim. And he did this one exercise I thought was phenomenal that's really, really, really helped. In that he said, find a picture of yourself as a young boy, as a toddler or as a young little guy, right? Mm-hmm. And look at that photo. And I have this one photo of me, a cheeky little dude, standing in the back of a car, kind of with a little bit of a mischievous face, look on my face. And he said, would you look at that little boy? If you saw that little boy in front of you, would you say the same things that you say to yourself right now in terms of beating that kid up?
Right. It's
not
powerful.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Not so much but the emotional and some of the mental anguish that you can impart on someone else. Would you ever do that to a little kid?
Can you imagine saying to a 2-year-old, man up?
Yeah.
Stop
crying.
Stop crying.
So those types of things. So you take that into my head and say, okay, now, why do I do that now? Why do I beat myself up now? It's the same. I'm the same person, right?
Right.
Just I'm older. So that was quite a mindset and a change of perspective and a paradigm shift for me. I think
I like
that was
that,
really,
Tom.
really powerful.
Powerful inner child work. It's very
So a lot of
Bradshaw.
folks have their picture of their toddler in front of their computer.
Yeah. I love that. I really do. And it reminds me of a bit of, when we do self-talk work in therapy, the idea of what's an automatic thought, what's an underlying assumption, and what's a core belief comes in. And then, something else that comes into this dialogue that I've used from time to time is, when you hear that self-talk, like the messaging, as you said, Tom, I always ask, can you listen to what the voice sounds like? And can we also figure out whose voice that might be?
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
And if we can figure that out, we actually can do a little bit of work on where is that coming from,
Right.
and why does this person, if we know, have that power over us today?
I just got a chill.
Yeah.
I just
Oh,
got
yeah.
a chill
Yeah.
up my neck.
Yeah. Something similar. I would often in counseling people, I would say, bring in a picture of when you were a child, and they bring it in, and I say, talk to me about this little boy or this little girl. And what message do you now, as an older adult, what message do you want to give them that you didn't get then? And it always ended up with tears, because they never thought about that, because they hadn't gone back to look at that child. And I would just say, tell me what this little boy was like. What was he thinking? What did he want to do? And then you're right, Jim. Then where do those messages come from that you can't be like that? You've got to be something else.
Which you can't do.
Yeah.
So that's just shaming the person you are.
That's the shaming.
Right?
Exactly.
I'm thinking of John. Obviously, you all know John Bradshaw. Right around the time with Claudia Black. And there's a lot of ACOA overlap here, so I see another podcast coming. But that inner child work is so important, because I think a lot of people don't realize, men or women or anywhere in between, right? That it's like the body gets older, but the your inner self is your inner self, kind of tagging along.
And one of the challenges, this is where my mind is going right now, one of the challenges is that I used to do that with students in my counseling office and in my class when I taught. You've done it in workshops. You've done it as a coach, because you were a coach. Jim, you've worked with so many young athletes, and you had your private practice, and you're teaching now. So we can do it with a small group. How do we as a society get the messages that we're talking about out to a greater population? And that's why I'm so appreciative, Kim, of you doing these podcasts, because that's a way to do it. But I don't want us to limit. There's so many people who are limited because they don't get to have these conversations. And so where do they go with this?
It was a great. Dave just took what I was about. It's perfect. Like we're not scripting anything, viewers. This is all right off the cuff, and that's exactly what I was just going to ask, and you said it better. So let's talk about that exact thing. Where do we go from here? We got to end on a positive note. I think it's getting better, but a long way to go. Wouldn't
I
you
just
agree?
say one thing. I went to a men's conference a few weeks ago in the Adirondacks. It was the first time that they had done a men's conference. This group had done women's conferences where 700
Really?
women come and they have incredible speakers and workshops. This is the first time for men. 350 guys who
Oh
couldn't
Wow.
wait to get there. Early morning discussions, they couldn't wait to dive in. Certainly coming out of, exiting the post-pandemic side,
Right.
where we were so isolated. And one of the themes we talked about, and I'll get to kind of where it goes, but in that we as men have this internal motivation that we have to do it on our own.
Yeah.
We're strong, we can figure it out, we do it on ours. I don't need any help. The paradox is that we need to be, as social human beings, we need to be with others and we need to be able to reach out. And it's such a distortion for us when we are by ourselves for too long.
Right.
And you don't have that give and take out, from the checking in with someone else, giving that feedback. So it was just, I think for me, a bit of a harbinger for the future, but it's like, there's a longing for guys to get together, to have discussions more like this that are open.
Well, it's a safe place, right?
Yeah.
Without
And couldn't wait for, this group to get together.
It's so shut down,
It was,
right?
it was unbelievable.
And obviously, anybody shut down doesn't go anywhere good.
No.
We had yet another school shooting just this week.
Yeah.
So I mean, and which obviously, the profile of that. I don't open up that whole thing for right now because we can do a whole podcast on that. But obviously, the profile is men, right,
Yeah.
with
Oh, yeah.
mental
Yeah.
health
Yeah.
issues and and shut down. That was a different kind of shutdown. But shut down, emotionally shut down, doesn't go anywhere good. Is the point, right? So as far
And
as
bring in the bullying.
the bullying, I mean,
So they're, again, another
because-
part of the podcast, but all these are kind of attributes. to
They're all
this.
related.
Yeah.
because hurt people often hurt people, like we all know that, right? That's how it goes. So to wind up, gentlemen, let's think of something we can sort of say to our viewers about, where do we go from here, really?
I would say, just as kind of ended the last segment, is there is such a longing for this, and there's such an appetite for men to get together, to have these discussions. It's okay, it's fine. I think now is the time, post-pandemic, now's the time to begin talking about this. So I think we're at a, a real turning point. I wouldn't say a perfect storm, but there is a lot of ingredients that have come together to form where we are now. And I think there's a longing and an interest and a huge demand for it now. And I think it is incumbent upon us to kind of carry this discussion forward.
Excellent.
And there is hope, and I think that's to kind of piggyback off for what you just said, Tom, is that the fact that these conversations can begin, the fact that there are people willing to talk about this, the fact that we can look at the difference about being our worst enemy and our best friend. How do we actually become our best friend, or even let's just stick with a better friend, or an acquaintance versus an enemy. We can use whatever language we use that will get us somewhere. But to recognize it begins with the self, because we now have the power to make this change.
And a line that I've used a lot, as Kim well knows, and you do too, Jim. Once you're aware, you're responsible. Once we help people become aware that there's such a need out there, that we've got to do a better job than what we've done, and here's some things we can do, then we're responsible to follow up on that.
Right.
I would say too, from a generational standpoint, I'm looking at my two sons. And they are incredibly empathetic, loving guys. One is an infantry soldier, okay, coming from a very masculine side, a very protective side. But I think, fortunately for my wife and I think we maybe broke the cycle that I had gone through and kind of opened it up for a new, loving, open, kind relationship of men where they can express their feelings. And I think there is a younger generation who is open and more open than maybe we are at expressing themselves and being more comfortable about that. It's just we need to create the venues for them to do that.
And we need to give them permission to do that.
Mhm.
So even when we didn't get the permission when we were younger,
Exactly.
and we may not be getting that permission from around us, whether it's a bureaucracy we work in,
Right.
but we still are. It is our responsibility to do this.
And I think too, we have 2 sons, as you all know, also, that no matter what, with any kids, we can say whatever, and that can support whatever we're talking about, but it's the role modeling. It's
Yeah.
very Bandura, right? But
Yep.
kids are watching you all day, every day.
All the time.
Mhm.
So role modeling, and you know, like I said about my wonderful husband, he's the I love yous all the time with the boys, and they might just kind of stand there like an A-frame, you know, but he kissed them on the cheek, and you know, I love you, and just really to the men, whether your fathers or not, but to them, their coaches and teachers and everything, to really, this is my female opinion, is just if they could just be as authentic as you can be, then
Right.
that's what you're role modeling for the young ones, which then makes it okay.
And one of the fun things for me being me is that I love you is not a question. So if I say I love you, it means I love you.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean I'm expecting you to say back, oh, I love you too. If I come in from a genuine place in my heart, then I'm just sharing that with you. And if it makes you uncomfortable, that's not my problem.
Yeah.
Because I love you is not a question, it's a statement.
I love that. That's a
Very nice,
great
yeah.
point to end on. So, well, we are very, very excited, and like to say that the 3rd episode will be coming sometime soon. And thank you for listening, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen,
Thank you.
for
Take
joining
care.
us.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.